hosts and hopefully your new bookish pals. I'm Hannah MacDonald.
And I'm Lydia Clare. Our November book club pick of the month is the brilliant debut novel Isaac and the Egg by Bobby Palmer. We meet Isaac at the worst point in his life. Little does he know that in a moment he will discover something that will change everything in the form of an abandoned and mysterious egg.
Bobby Palmer is an English author and freelance journalist. His writing has appeared in a range of publications, including Time Out, GQ, Esquire, Men's Health, and Cosmopolitan. His debut novel, Isaac and the Egg, was published in August by Headline Review, and it's a truly unforgettable read and one that we had to feature as a book club pick because we loved it. And we're so happy that Bobby has joined us today. So Bobby, welcome to our Bookends.
Hello, thanks for having me.
So what we like to ask, first of all our Bookends listening will know this, is our most kind of pressing question, which is, what are you currently reading?
I've just finished a book that you might have heard of, Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow by Gabrielle.
Here he comes.
Yeah, well, it was one of those ones that I felt like I was starting to feel like a sort of imposter book fan if I hadn't read it because everyone was telling me how good it was. So I read it and it was really good as expected.
Yeah.
I can now be part of that club of people telling everyone else to read it. I'm
very jealous.
Yeah,
it's so much about it.
It's a very unique book. I haven't really read anything like it. It's all about years, like decades long sort of romance between two video game developers. But it's not, I wouldn't want that to put anyone off reading it if they're not into video games, because it's sort of about a lot more than that. It's really good.
Yeah, I've heard loads of people say that, like, because I quite like gaming and you're not a big fan. But I think that I've heard on the grapevine, the bookish grapevine, that actually you don't have to know anything about gaming or be particularly interested in that world to really engage with the novel. Like, I think it's meant to be like amazing.
It's just one of those books where I think it could be about anything, but the it's written so well and the characters are so real that it doesn't really matter what it's about. It's just it's done really, really well. And it had me. I was reading it in a dentist waiting office and burst into tears.
Oh no!
Oh no! Only slightly awkward.
I think someone might have thought I had like a really invasive dental procedure coming up, but no, I was actually just enjoying my book.
Scaring all the nervous children in the waiting room, like, oh my goodness, how bad is it?
Yeah, I was listening to the Literary Friction podcast, and they were speaking about they had the author on, and it sounded so good. And Lydia's just got a copy of it for her birthday, which I will absolutely be stealing.
I know.
It's a really beautiful looking book. It's shiny.
Yeah, it is. It's shiny.
I hate to admit that that's the sort of thing that like made me want to own it, but I'm this sort of magpie being like, ooh.
No, I am absolutely like that. That is literally me. If I see a book cover that I like, I'm like drawn to it like a magnet. Like, have to have it.
Yeah, it's true. You're a very cover oriented reader, aren't you? Sometimes, like when we're shopping.
Yeah, it's a problem. So let's get into your book. The start of the novel is something that I felt immediately hooks you in. Why was it important to you for the reader to meet Isaac at the worst moment in his life?
I think I wanted this to be, it's quite a bleak story at times, but I wanted it to be an ultimately hopeful one. So I think the reason that you'd meet Isaac at his lowest point would be, sort of the only way is up. But also there are elements of mystery in it, and I wanted you to I didn't want there to be any backstory, any baggage before you got into the central mystery of the book, which is you have this character, he finds himself in the woods and he finds a giant egg, because it's such a weird premise. I think that you need it to happen pretty soon so you can start explaining what's going on. Otherwise, people, if it's leading up to it and they know it's coming, might be about to put the book down.
Yeah. Yeah, when I was reading it, I was really in awe of you, because I was like, okay, you've started at the worst moment in his life, but you've still managed to, you would have thought that that was all the kind of dramatic tension that you could get through. And yet there was still more. Every time, I'd get to a new chapter, it was just, there was still so many moments of dramatic tension. And I was like, okay, you've got this character in like the worst part of his life, and then it's still so much of a roller coaster of a book. And I don't know how you did that, but I mean, that's clearly a sign of a great writer. So
I think I was like 3/4 of the way through writing the first draft when I realized that was going to happen. Before then it was a much simpler story. So it was a bit of a blessing and a curse, because I had the benefit of hindsight, having written the thing, that I could go back and add in all that dramatic tension that you're talking about, sort of breadcrumb a realization, so that it felt like you were always aware that there was something else going on. But it was also really difficult because I'd already written the book, and you can't when you're writing something, you don't know if you're giving too much away or if you're not giving enough away at any given point. So you have to just keep writing it and keep showing it to people, and then once the twist is sort of spoilt for them, you have to find someone else to show it to. It's a good way to make friends, I guess.
Yeah. I love the mystery of it. I really like, just what is this egg? What is it? Like, just, it's the most simple of questions that we want answering at the beginning of the novel, isn't it? It's what is this egg? What is it? Yeah. Where's it come from? Why is it here? Why is Isaac found it? And the journey that one simple question, you stick with the novel the entire time. Like, I need to know. It's such a wonderful mystery. It really is.
Yeah. I really like the idea that you were, I don't think this is too much of a spoiler for someone who hasn't read it, but that you'd know the egg exists from the title. He would find the egg in the first chapter, and that first question you'd have would be like, what's going to hatch? What's going to come out of it?
Yeah.
And then you realize by the end of the first chapter that the egg itself is a being, there's nothing inside it. It's actually like a thing, a living creature itself. And I like the idea that you'd have that really early on, because then you're sort of like, I can't trust anything that's coming. It's like, if I can't take that at face value, I can't take anything else at face value.
Yeah. It definitely keeps you guessing. And I love, there's a little moment at the end, this is at the very start of the book, so again, no spoilers, but where he has the egg in the car and he straps the egg in, and he's so worried that there's going to be like yolk everywhere, and he's like, will it have a yolk? Like, what? There'll be yolk in the car? Like, and he's driving like, don't spill the egg, don't spill the egg. I just thought it was just hysterical, absolutely hysterical. But moving on, I think we were talking about tomorrow being unique. When you read Isaac and the Egg, it feels very unique, both in its story and its formatting. Like, even if you have a quick flick through of the book, there are pages and pages of like a scream that lasts 3 pages, and egg-shaped text and stuff that make it really fun and inventive. What was the process of creating that kind of formatting?
I always knew it was going to look different, because I think it sort of comes from, I never knew I really wanted to be like a novelist. It's something that has happened almost accidentally. I was a journalist before, but before that I always really wanted to draw comic books. I used to be an illustrator. So I think I almost approached writing a book with more of a visual eye than with a sort of textual eye. So I knew it would I wanted it to look fun, because the books I like reading are the ones that look fun. So like I'd read Extremely Loud and Incredibly Close before I started writing it, and that's got like loads of, it's got like ticket stubs and photos that the main kid has taken, and it just really added to the reading experience. And I read like George Saunders, Max Porter. They're all people who play around with text. Patrick Ness as well. I just really like that sort of book. So I wanted to do that. And I don't know if Isaac as a character was an illustrator before I knew I wanted to do that, or if Isaac was an illustrator originally and that's why I wanted to do it. But I think the two things came hand in hand, because even though it's not in the first person, you hear it all. Basically, it all follows Isaac's point of view. So I wanted it to be that you would see the world of the book book in the visual way that he sees the world.
Yeah.
So I mean, when I was writing it, I had probably even more weird elements in there than ended up in the finished thing, but they were all in my kind of badly formatted Google Doc that I was writing it in. And I liked the idea that Isaac and Mary, his wife, made children's books together so that it would look a bit like a children's book. Even the title Isaac and the Egg sounds a bit like a children's book.
Yeah.
But then I was very lucky when I got a book deal that I ended up working really closely with the art director of Headline, who's called Patrick, and he came from a background of working in children's books. So he worked on a lot of Patrick Ness's books, the Chaos Walking books, which actually sort of inspired some of the text in this. So it was a really nice full circle moment where he ended up designing the text in this book, and it was his idea to really go for it with the scream that you mentioned, and that went over like half a page in my manuscript, and he was like, let's make it go over 4 pages. And
I love that.
Yeah, I think the funniest though is like the word search was one thing I was particularly proud of getting into a novel, and that came because I wrote this whole thing during lockdown, and I rewatched New Girl, and there's a whole plot line where Nick, one of the main characters, writes a novel that is just sort of totally out there that no one will publish, and he talks about having a word search in it, and I was like, I'm going to do that. I'm going to get a word search, and I did. Now you can buy a book in a bookshop that's got the sort of Nick Miller word search.
I love that.
I thoroughly enjoyed doing the word search as well. I actually did it. I was like, I'm going to find all the words.
I'm glad. I
took the time.
I hope that people would.
I'm so pleased that you've got a New Girl reference in there. I love that. I didn't even clock that, but that's amazing.
That might be an exclusive. I'm not sure I've actually told that story before, so there you go.
It's exclusive. Love that. So going back to the egg, I personally think that the egg is one of the best parts of the novel. I was obsessed with the egg. I would go as far to say that I think the egg is one of my favourite characters ever.
Oh, wow.
And he took me on a roller coaster. I say he. The egg took me on a
I think you could say it was a he. I think he's what he is.
We don't know. But the egg took me on a roller coaster, and at first I was really creeped out by the egg, and then I was really I thought the egg was really lovable and cute, and then I was going back to being creeped out by it, especially when it brings the beans on toast in the toaster into bed. I was like, stop. No, that would stress me out if that got brought into my bedroom.
You can tell that you don't have children, because that is something that my children would do.
That would be something that would make me cry.
Beans on toast in the toaster.
Where did the inspiration come from with egg?
Egg is I don't know why it's an egg. Personally, it just always was an egg. I think the title I sort of had before anything else, and I was like, it's going to be called Isaac and the Egg, and it's going to be about a guy called Isaac finding a giant egg. But another going back to the idea of it being like the way that Isaac sees the world is that he's a guy who likes watching movies. He's a bit of a man child, and he has all these sort of 80s pop cultural references stored up. So I like there's this big question of, is the egg real or is it a figment of his imagination? And you never quite know. Either interpretation is just as valid as the other, I think. But I liked the idea that if it was a figment of his imagination, he'd have made it up based on all these references that he has in his own head. So it's got the backstory of E.T., but it's sort of got the look of like Gizmo or an Ewok. It's got like Mr. Tickle arms. So it's like all these different references that I had coming together. But to be honest, my first point of reference for it was Baby Yoda, and Baby Yoda.
Baby Yoda.
Weirdly, Baby Yoda inspired this entire book, because it was while the Baby Yoda craze was happening, and while I was watching an episode of The Mandalorian, which is the show that Baby Yoda came from, where I had this thought where I was like, I want to write a really serious book that tackles some really serious themes, but I also want Baby Yoda to be in it. And I thought it would be like a really interesting challenge as an author to try and discuss stuff that I felt was worthwhile discussing, but to just have that totally surreal, out of place element without making it seem like you were making light of something. And it ended up being a really good, a really fun might not be the right word, a really interesting thing to write, and something that needed a lot of editing so that it didn't feel totally wrong.
I love that, and I think I need to go back and reread it now with that knowledge, because maybe I won't be creeped out from the start. I'll just be like, oh, it's so cute.
I felt like he was a bit like, do you remember, because it's a reference in the book about a Furby when you were a kid.
Yes.
Yeah.
It looked exactly like that, but with like weird long arms. And I loved my Furby when I was little. I was like, oh, it's come back.
I'm glad you said he creeped you out, though, because I think it's sort of intentional that you, especially when you first meet him, he's like a horrible little creature who's eating rotten meat off the kitchen floor. And I think the idea was sort of that Isaac is in that state. You know, he's gone through this enormous grief, and he's reverted back to an animalistic, you know, not taking care of himself form. So as the book progresses and as he starts to come back to reality and get back in touch with the human world, the egg becomes a bit more human, and you know, it starts to sort of speak a little bit and becomes more like a human kid than a strange creature of the woods.
I love that. We're both like, I love that. But yes, definitely Furby.
Yeah.
You mentioned before about the film references and the kind of 80s cultural references that I thoroughly enjoyed the whole way through. How difficult was it for you to like pick which ones to include? Because I feel like you had a plethora of like amazing films that you could have included, and the ones that you did were perfect. But how was that process of choosing what to include and what not to include?
There were a lot more. my editor cut a lot of them out. No, I think a lot of them I basically, you know, I didn't intentionally put in the film references. It was just the way I was writing it. It was like an easy way of describing stuff, because it's how I approach things. You know, I love films, and it was just this very obvious thing for me that if I walked into the woods and I found a giant egg, I'd be like, oh, this is like Jurassic Park. This is like Alien. So, you know, I'm not saying I was being lazy, but I think the ones that stayed in were the ones that just felt very natural. The book itself, I think the two most prominent ones are probably It's a Wonderful Life and E.T. And the structure of the book definitely in the first half borrows from both of those quite intentionally, and so that as you read it, you expect something, and then, you know, something else actually happens. But you know, Mary Poppins is in there, Dirty Dancing is in there. I think a lot of, I'd say like half of the film references were ones that made sense for the story, and half of the ones were just funny because I really like the idea of like Isaac and the egg trying out the Dirty Dancing lift in the kitchen while they're at home. Or, you know, like the egg sort of doing Home Alone or doing Risky Business while Isaac goes out. I think, yeah.
I love the fact that Isaac was actually a bit worried that the egg would request to do the lift, and he was like, boo, no.
Are you the kind of person then that whenever you're having a conversation, you slot a load of film references in?
Yeah. I'm one of those really, really awful, like, I feel like it's specifically men who will just like quote films, even if like don't know the quote, and then it's like, oh, shut up, just like get a hobby.
I can't tell you how much I infuriate my boyfriend, because he is a massive film, I don't know what word you'd use. Buff.
You can say nerd.
Nerd, okay, film nerd. But he's a Marvel nerd, but he and somehow managed to get me to watch all the Marvel films when I said I never would. But he watches so many films, and it infuriates him that I've barely seen anything, and I'm the actor in the relationship. And he's like, how are you an actor and you haven't watched any of these films that I'm talking about? And I'm like, I'm sorry.
It stresses me out. It stresses me out.
I'm the same. I'm the person like during Marvel films who's sort of turning around and going like, that's the Abomination. He was in the Incredible Hulk 10 years ago.
Me and my partner, we introduced Hannah to the Beatles and made her listen to Beatles. She couldn't name them, which was concerning.
I named two of them.
She could name half of the Beatles, which frankly almost broke this relationship up. It was nearly the end of a pair of bookends. So it's me, one bookend.
So there's one section in the book that I had a really serious question about. It's on page 87, and Isaac is speaking about he's reflecting on his grief and reflecting on him and Mary's relationship, and the quote is a pajama top pulled by the side of her bed, never to be worn or washed or ironed again. Now, Bobby, who's ironing the pajama tops?
Who's doing it?
I thought that was going to be really serious. I was like, oh, you totally just like cut through the laughter, and then I was like, who's hiding there? But well, yeah, not me. So maybe I'll have to have that changed for the paperback.
Oh, absolutely.
Maybe.
I read it and I was like, hang on.
I love maybe.
Do other people do this? Because it's not me.
I don't even iron my get
normal tops. I've ironed it for this, Bobby. I've ironed it for this. I'll give you that.
I love that we've come to this interview with edit.
Yeah. So, Bobby, here's what you need to change. No, in all seriousness, though, it is a really raw and beautiful portrayal of grief and of loss, and it was summarized by these moments of reflection on like the mundanities of life, I guess. What drew you to focusing specifically on these smaller details of life, in the context of his grief?
So when I first started writing it, I wasn't necessarily setting out to write a book about grief. I wanted to write a book about how young men in the modern world sort of approach their emotions and suppress their emotions, and specifically the way that they will make a joke out of everything, be very lighthearted, not talk to their friends about anything specifically, especially serious, and also almost burden their, if they have a life partner, sort of burden them with all of their emotional baggage, but not really open up to anyone else. So it became this thing where Isaac has that relationship. What would happen if he lost, the love of his life? Who would he turn to? And in this case, it's the egg. But I didn't want, because it's not autobiographical in its depiction of grief, I didn't want it to feel inauthentic. It meant a lot to me that, people would read it and it wouldn't feel like it was making light of grief, because grief is, the most serious thing out there. So in that respect, I made sure I read a lot of first-person accounts of the kind of grief that Isaac is going through, specifically memoirs, specifically some really good ones like Joan Didion, The Year of Magical Thinking, A Grief Observed by C.S. Lewis, and one particularly illuminating one called Say Her Name by Francisco Goldman, and that's an account of, I guess, a similar situation to what Isaac goes through, in that it's someone who loses their girlfriend in a freak accident when she's in her 20s, and this really happened to the author, and he wrote this incredibly raw, really, really moving, very hard to read memoir about it, and that really sort of opened my eyes to how I wanted to write about grief in this book, because part of it is, the way he talks about those day-to-day things. I remember one specific section where he talks about feeling like he's got a bit better, and then he opens like a scrub in the shower, or a body butter type thing, and he looks inside and her fingerprints are in it, and it just destroys him, like where she scooped it, because it's like a fossil. So, and there are these things he talks about, just falling over in the street, just like falling over and being like, I'm an adult and I never used to fall over, but and that inspired. There's a bit in the book where it sort of talks about Isaac almost losing his center of gravity and feeling like a coin with one side. So a lot of that came from these really powerful accounts of grief I was reading. Yeah, so I'd really recommend that book if you can manage it, because it is a tough read. I think I read a review in The Guardian that called it sort of unbearably sad, I think was the words they used, and it is a tough one, but it's one of those books that you sort of go away from feeling quite changed.
I mean, we've read A Little Life, so I think we can handle anything.
I haven't read A Little Life.
We can handle the grief.
So,
my current read actually is The Year of Magical Thinking by Joan Didion.
Okay.
I'm halfway through, and be in the right mindset before you go into it, but it is phenomenal.
That talks about a lot of the same sort of things. It is the day-to-day stuff of losing a loved one, especially someone that you live with, that you spend every day with. There's the really famous line that I think there's something a bit like it in Isaac and the Egg as well, where she talks about not wanting to throw away her husband's shoes, shoes because what will he wear when he comes back, which I thought was really, really powerful. The funny thing is I don't really like reading really sad books, and I've never read A Little Life, but I've read the Wikipedia synopsis. I know everyone loves it, and I wanted to know what it was about, but I was like, I don't think I can hack it.
No. If you don't like sad books, that won't work.
No.
I approached Isaac and the Egg, in the first case, it was a comedy. It was a straight up comedy. And it was really only in writing it that I started to get to know Isaac and Mary and their life together. And I was doing all this reading around it. And I was very aware of the fact that if you start writing a book about grief, you can't half-ass it. You can't just, it's not going to be a situation where he's there like, my wife's died. Oh, well, let's go have all these funny japes with the egg, and I didn't want Mary to be the dead wife trope that you see in so many films where she's like in two flashbacks and in one of them she's just like laughing under a bedsheet.
And the room's white.
Yeah,
Fully
exactly.
white.
Yeah. So I think the book just transformed into something I wasn't expecting it to be, and it got a lot deeper and a lot more serious, and it became more of an exploration of grief and of love, I think, because I think that was something that really struck me about reading all those memoirs, is that none of them are books about death. They're books about their love for the person who is gone. And I think that's why even a book with such a sad, overbearing loss in it can actually be quite hopeful, because they're all testaments to love.
I think as well, for me, what worked really well was the isolation of Isaac, and particularly in the first half of the novel, where it almost felt like we were in a submarine, away from everything, and it's just him and the egg in this little world that happens to be his house. How important was it for you to get that isolation right, to get that feeling, that claustrophobia almost?
Partly it was intentional, partly it was accidental. It was intentional in the way that I always thought of it as a one-man show, that you essentially have one character that you're very, very closely focused on, and everything he's going through is what you would experience while you were reading him, because I wanted it to be an exploration of his psyche and that type of person. And then you basically have these two characters, one of whom is a figment of his memory, Mary, and it's sort of just like the version of him of her that he remembers, and then the other is maybe a figment of his imagination. So really, when you take those two parts out, you've got one character. And I've always thought it would be best as like a stage show with him, Isaac, a puppet, and then just voices off stage. I think that's how little the other characters sort of come into it. They're tend to be voices on the other side of a locked front door. But it was also accidental in the respect that I started writing it, and I think about a week or two after I started writing it, the first lockdown hit. So it became a book about isolation in a period of immense isolation. And I was writing this book 7 days a week as a freelance journalist who'd lost all of his freelance work. So it was really all I had. And we were in a situation where we couldn't leave the house. So it became a weirdly helpful writing experience to embody the thoughts of a man who's not got any contact with the outside world, and who's sort of living in his dressing gown and losing his grip on reality.
I love that. In his dressing gown, just losing his grip of reality.
Okay, that's my boyfriend.
That was
me. So a line that really struck me was, joking had always been Isaac's first line of defense. And I feel like that is something that lots of us do. And I think it's especially something that a lot of men do. And, the novel is filled with puns and humour, whilst it's exploring these topics of suicide, grief, mental health. And men's mental health still has such a huge stigma. But was this something that you consciously developed in Isaac's character? His using humour for avoidance of the issues at hand, I guess?
It's definitely something I consciously developed when I had started writing the book, but it wasn't something I sort of consciously approached, because it was just the way Isaac was. And I think that's because it's the way I am, and there's a lot of me in him. And a lot of my friends are the same, a lot of young men I know. And I think that idea, you can be fairly emotionally intelligent, you can be a fairly modern man, but you still resort to those same, because it's so ingrained. And it's if you were raised even in the 90s or even the noughties, the overwhelming message of media was still that men act in a certain way. Don't cry, don't tell your friends you love them, all these sorts of things. And I think only now does that seem to be changing. So for people like me, it's still our nature is to act in that way, to make light of everything. And if we're meeting up with our mates at the pub, I think there's a bit in the book where it says what they talk about at the pub is who would win in a fight. Ducks. I think it's like a duck-sized bear or 20 bear-sized ducks. Or
yes, I loved that.
And that's the sort of, that's the sort of thing that we talk about. And so it was in that respect, when I realized that Isaac would be that type of guy, it became an intentional exploration of how do you open up if your nature isn't opening up. And I think it's quite telling that the only thing he feels able to open up to in the first case is this sort of 2 foot tall alien he finds in the woods, because he can't just text his friends and say, I'm not doing that. I did a book club the other day where they'd read the book and they were sort of talking about it, and someone in that book club made a really interesting point that I actually hadn't really thought of. And they were like, they said what they liked about going inside Isaac's head is that those people who do make a joke out of everything, you never actually see how they cope with something they can't make a joke out of, because when you see them, they're making a joke out of it. You never see behind that facade. So I think that was a nice way of summing up what I was trying to do with Isaac, which is that you would see inside this head of someone who on the outside is always trying to tell everyone he's fine, but on the inside is falling to pieces.
And that actor just immediately came to mind. What's his name? I can't think of his name. Mrs. Doubtfire.
Robin Williams.
Yeah, Robin Williams.
Yeah.
You know, that's what everybody said, you know, when he died, that, you know, it is always the person that's cracking the jokes and that's, you know, making light of everything.
That's
actually,
you don't check on it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. The one that you think's doing okay is actually not. Yeah.
I think that for me, like, our bookends will know this, but I lost my mother last year, and my grief journey has been bonkers.
It's been a journey.
It's been a journey. Let's tell you, in fact, put a 1 X factor on it, like Natalia, right? Terrible. But I have to just say to you how grateful I am to you, having written something so relatable and honest, and I want to sort of embarrass you now by just reading a little bit that I felt like really spoke to me and summed up grief in a really, really inventive and wonderfully honest way. So guys, I've got a quote. Sit down, get your brew out. It's going to be a while. This is Isaac talking to a therapist. He isn't telling Dr. Abbas about the times he wakes himself up in the middle of the night screaming Mary's name. He isn't telling her that he smells her perfume or hears her voice just around the corner of every doorway, and how this frightens him more than it comforts him. He isn't telling her that he still calls Mary's phone just to hear her voicemail, that her sing-song voice still says, "We both know I'll forget to call you back," that Isaac still sobs and sobs after the tone. He isn't telling her about the panic attacks, the fainting fit, those first 3 weeks where he found himself waking up on the funeral director's carpet. He isn't telling her about the screaming, the materialising out of nowhere, the times he found himself half-dressed and terrified and in tears in supermarkets and car parks and sterile waiting rooms. He isn't telling her where he goes, where he stays, how guilty he feels when he finally returns and finds the egg waiting for him, blinking judgmentally from the hallway floor. And oh yeah, he isn't telling her about the egg. He isn't telling anyone about the egg. For me, having experienced grief quite recently, that not telling people what you are doing to feel that grief is so natural to you. When you're going through something, it's so easy to not tell people stuff and not admit that, you know what, I like, one of my experiences was I made some chopped tomatoes and spaghetti, which is something that my mum used to make all of the time, and I was like, I'm starving, do this really quick, and the smell of it made me collapse on the floor and just sit and cry for like half an hour. I mean, he ate the pasta. I'm not wasteful. But, you know, this kind of, that how these things knock you for six, like the, you know, the knife in the butter and the, you know, her plate and the fact that the meal that he was making for us staying the same, like all of these things were so accurate. And so it's not really a question, to be honest. It's just me waxing lyrical about how much I thought it was just a wonderful piece of work, and thank you for writing.
Honestly, it means so much to hear it, though, because like writing about a topic like this, it's a really difficult thing to write about, especially when you're writing about a type of grief that you haven't been through. You don't want to feel like a fraud, and you don't want people to pick it up and go, that's not my experience of it. And you know, there will be people who pick it up and go, that's not my experience of it. But the nicest things I've heard about the book are people who've been through that sort of grief and have said it it helped, or at the very least, I felt seen by it. I think it's just, I think what people hopefully connect with is the chaos of it. It's not, when I first started writing it, Egg was a simpler metaphor and was essentially, he was the 5 stages of grief. So he, in the scene where they trashed the kitchen, which was always there, he was anger, and then, he was denial when they were going out and having fun. And then as it evolved, it became, I had to try and put myself in Isaac's place and think, how would I react if I'm married? How would I react if I lost my wife? And it was all those little things you were just talking about, the little pieces of a life that you build together, and then when it's all gone out the window, what do you do? And he's just in this, everything's destroyed, and he's picking up the pieces, but the pieces don't fit back together. So it's just this crazy chaotic thing. And then the question that comes at the end is essentially, like, if he can't build back the life he had before, but maybe he can build something else so he can at least keep going. And I think that was important to me, because it was important that you wouldn't feel hopeless when you finished reading it. It was important that as much as it's a story that can be really sad, you'd ultimately feel like there's a hopeful reason for it existing, I think.
Yeah. I think as well, the thing that probably got me choked up the most was
choked up you. Hey, if it moved heart like a swinging brick, this one.
I feel honoured.
You should
get away. Is the unfinished book, the fact that she would never finish the book, and it killed me, because I was like, no, like, I feel like that would be my boyfriend. What he would find is all my books everywhere, because I've got far too many
books.
But an unread book, I think, would be the thing that would, like, finish Billy off. So obviously, you've mentioned your wife, and you are recently married, aren't you? So congratulations.
Thank you.
Was it in New York?
It was in Italy.
Oh, where did I go to New York from?
I don't know, but you sound like a bit like a stalker. Were you there?
I just thought it was an exciting, exciting wedding.
I hope you didn't turn up in New York trying to get it.
I'm sure this is where they said it was.
I don't know where I've got New York from. Sorry. So I would love to talk about your writing process, and this does link in with your wife. I'm not just totally changing topic.
I was going to say, I'm confused.
But I obviously especially loved the writing of Isaac and Mary, and their relationship, and its many nuances, flaws, eccentricities, I guess. But how much do you include of yourself and your own relationships in your writing, or do you try to kind of separate the two, I guess?
In this book, all of it, which is a really, really weird thing to say, because it's a story about bereavement. But I wanted Isaac and Mary to feel totally real, and people have said they do, which is really nice. And I think they feel real because they kind of are real, because there's so much of me and Nina in there, even down to, we talked about the pajama tops earlier, and there's a running joke that she has these pajama tops that are like, I love New York. Yeah. I love goats. I love my bed. And Nina has all of those, like the first.
Did you tell her before she read this?
I did, yeah. She knew what the book was about, so I think it was a weird reading experience for her, obviously. Especially probably because there's so much of us in it. But then, what she said was that it was really nice, because it felt like one of those other books I was talking about, a sort of an admission, a testament of love, and her words where it's not the sort of stuff that I necessarily say out loud, which is going back to how men approach things. So it was maybe almost a confessional piece of writing, saying like, I can't say this out loud, but I love you loads. But I mean, even there's like a text conversation. Isaac scrolls back through text to their, like, one of their first conversations, and there's one that's like about her having a heated blanket and him taking the piss out of her, saying she's an old woman. That is literally like our first text conversation. I just copied it verbatim from the script.
Oh, I love that.
So yeah, no, it was weird, I think, and it definitely feels weird to talk about in that respect. And it was weird for friends and family reading it, being like, does he want to kill her? But I think it came from a genuine place, and I think the book benefited from it, I hope. But I mean, Nina's my first editor of anything, so she very much read it in the first case and was like, yeah, okay, it's got my approval.
I love that.
Well, as long as it's got a stamp of approval,
Well,
it's
there
okay.
we
Yes.
go.
I wasn't just going to publish it and her pick it up off a bookshop and then go, wait a
Is this
second.
me?
Yeah.
And they did feel so real, and his grief was so like visceral. So I think you definitely kind of felt that in there. Like you'd obviously really put yourself. I mean, was that difficult to put yourself through that?
It was. It was a. I hate it when people say like I had to go to quite a dark place for this. But, like a method actor, but it was written during COVID, which wasn't a very nice time. I think it sort of stretched all of us a bit, and it was a really emotional writing process because I did have to go to quite a dark place for it. I had to at least do this very horrible what if, how would I act in this situation, and it was emotional. It was quite cathartic as well, and I remember writing the last page and crying and that's the second time I've mentioned crying here, so I am a man who cries. No, I remember
we appreciate it. We do. Yeah. We appreciate it.
I remember finishing the last page and crying, and then like going through to the other room when Nina was and being like, I've just finished the last page, I just cried, and she was like, you are so pretentious.
It's just so good.
Yeah. I'm crying at my own genius.
Well, I'm sure that you're not the only person that's going to be crying at the last page.
No,
I think it's more normal when it's the readers, not the author. I'm glad
but we're down for it. We don't.
I at least don't cry when I'm like talking. I'm not sitting here being like, oh, that scene.
And then I wrote this bit, and it was
We won't blame you. We
No.
won't blame you, honestly.
You said before, and Lydia has a question, and she's going to be annoyed at me. But
She always interrupts me. I'm just
sorry,
saying.
but I need to know because it's just
Just
come into my head, and I can't interrupt the flow of my brain. I'm sorry. You said before about the idea of a stage play and Isaac and a puppet, and I don't know if this was just an idea. But I know, obviously, as an actor, I know there's a lot of male actors that would absolutely leap at the chance of this role. Are there any plans in the pipeline for adaptations?
Yeah, she goes for adaptation.
Are you not
I
allowed to
can't
say?
talk about that. Well, early days, but obviously you can tell from the book how much I love films.
Yeah.
I think I almost wrote it like a film, but I've never tried writing a screenplay, so writing a book just felt like the natural thing to me. But I think it would naturally work on the screen. I think the nice thing about it is Isaac is a very vague character in a lot of ways. You don't really know what he looks like. You just, basically anyone could play him. And I like to think it'd be a bit of a gift of a role because you'd get to, be the only actor playing against a comedy puppet, but then acting really serious. It'd be a good challenge. I'd love it to happen. But until that point, I'd highly recommend people pick up the audiobook. You can't pick up an audiobook. Listen to the audio. Which is done by Johnny Flynn, who is a fantastic actor, and
Amazing.
he basically does the one-man show with it, and he does the voice of the egg, he does the doorbell, he is everything in it. So it's like a real piece of audio drama, and it's far be it from me to say it's better than the printed book, but
absolutely.
I
need to listen to this now. I'm so excited.
And if there's a film, 2 actors now.
Who are we going to play? The egg?
No,
Isaac?
Mary, Joy.
Okay.
Although, you know what? I could do the egg.
Johnny Flynn as Isaac, and you as the egg.
And me as the egg.
I would pay to see that. I'd pay good money.
Claire as the egg. I can see it on a poster. I'm visualising it, manifesting it now. Don't laugh at me. Don't laugh at my dreams.
I'm never going to let you live that down.
So what we like to end on and wrap up on is, again, one of my favourite questions. I like to probe people about things. I would like to know, what is your favourite author, or what authors inspire you or your work? This can be anything, but who's your favourite? Who am I writing down in my notepad?
It's like asking who your favourite child is.
The really pretentious answer is Virginia Woolf.
No, the really pretentious one would have been myself.
Yeah. I just inspire myself. Me and Virginia Woolf. I'd say, if you're talking about inspirational authors, me and Virginia. I mean, Mrs. Dalloway by Virginia Woolf is like my favorite book of all time, and I always go back to it because that's just what I think the perfect book is.
And it's currently sat on my shelf unread, so that needs to change now.
It's it's a great book, and it's one that really sort of opened up my eyes to what books could do. I read it at university, and up until that point, I thought reading was like Frankenstein and Les Miserables and all that stuff. So yeah, that she is my go-to. I really like. A few authors I've mentioned actually. George Saunders is a huge inspiration of mine. I really, really like what he does. He writes really weird stuff that also it's very funny, but it's very, he won I think he won the Booker Prize for Lincoln in the Bardo, which is a crazy book, but it just works because he's so good at what he does. And in terms of authors I'm sort of enjoying at the moment, I really like Sayaka Murata. I read Earthlings recently, which is
amazing.
I like that sort of weird fiction type stuff. So yeah, Max Porter.
Never guess.
Yeah, can you tell? And George Saunders, speaking of, wrote a book called A Swim in the Pond in the Rain, which is like a book on writing, but it's him dissecting Russian short stories. And I read that a couple of years ago, and I was just like, I'd never read anyone writing about writing better than that. So if there are sort of aspiring writers listening, that is like the book I would read, because he's great. He feels like you're sort of your father and your best friend and your mentor at the same time.
Also, that is an incredible title. I know.
Yeah, it's great. Yeah.
So good. So before we let you go, we do like to always ask if there's anything that you've been enjoying recently. Have you got any cultural recommendations for us?
I do. The Bear, which is
a
TV show. I think over here it's on Disney Plus. I don't know why I said over here like I'm ever anywhere but the UK. I think it's like an FX show in the US. When I was getting married in New York. No, it's on Disney Plus, and it is about a chef, a sort of young chef who returns to his brother's restaurant, like a sort of greasy sandwich restaurant in Chicago, to take it over after his brother dies. And it starts, you think it's going to be like Kitchen Confidential, like loads of sort of amped up testosterone fueled chefs in the kitchen, loads of stress. And it does have that, but it's really, really, it's a really tender depiction of men's mental health. It's a properly amazing show about masculinity, but also about the like high pressure jobs and sort of the spirit of a city like Chicago. It's like one of the best TV shows I think I've ever seen.
Wow.
And it's definitely got one of the best TV episodes I've ever seen, which is all shot in one take and is 20 minutes long, and I think is the most stressed I've ever been watching anything. Like it was like a really stressful experience. It's just set over like one bad patch in the kitchen for 20 minutes and you are just all in. And I was so stressed watching it, and then I think I watched it for the first time a couple of weeks ago, and then I watched it again this week, which either is
punishing yourself.
Yeah, either a form of self-punishment or just a sign that it's a really good show, because I never really watch stuff, especially like that soon afterwards. So that is my very, very firm and enthusiastic cultural recommendation.
I love that. Absolutely gonna watch that. That is a bit of me.
You know what it sounds reminiscent of? Have you watched Boiling Point with Stephen Graham?
No, but it's very much, it's something I really do want to watch. There's also that film that Bradley Cooper did a few years ago called Burnt, which is like a sort of really, if the bear's like that, but a lot less cheesy.
Yeah, I was going to say a little bit cheesy in that one.
That film's like, I've been a bad boy in the chefing industry, and now I have to go and chuck 1,000 oysters to pay penance for what I've done. It's a
lot of like waving a knife about and shouting.
Yeah, it's sort of like what
really
Hollywood thinks people in kitchens.
Yeah. Whereas Boiling Point is the opposite. It's very realistic, and it is shot, to look like one take.
Yes.
Continuous night in the kitchen. And I mean, you loved it as a former waitress, didn't you?
I worked in hospitality for 10 years, and the best and worst period of my life, to be honest. It is hell.
I've done the sort of restaurant job where you're the waiter and things aren't going well in the kitchen, and you're sort of trying to wrestle your way out of the kitchen door while all the complaining customers. I've sat down with the intention of watching Boiling Point several times and heard it's so stressful that I've been like, oh, I just want to, I'll watch Do Revenge instead or something.
It is quite stressful, but this is the sign for you to go and watch it.
Okay, deal.
And we will watch The Bear, and you'll get DMs.
We'll meet
being
up.
Like,
we'll meet
God,
up.
It's so good.
We'll do another episode.
Yes.
In a couple of weeks where we just discuss those two things.
The Bear and Boiling Point. Love that. Yeah. So unfortunately, we have to let you go now, and we're really sad about that because this has been so great. And listeners, Isaac in the Egg is available in all bookshops. We will pop a link in the show notes to buy the book. If you haven't already read it and you've not listened to this,
what are you doing?
Come on, it's amazing, and we really, really loved your book. We're not just saying that because we wanted you on the podcast. We genuinely loved it.
Thank you.
Sorry, do you have anything coming up that our listeners could support you with apart from buying your book? Anything
to be honest, I'm in that sort of mercifully quiet period after the books come out. I've done my event, and when the paperback comes out, which I think will be next spring, keep an eye out for events. Yes. But until then, buy the book for all your relatives at Christmas.
Buy the bloody book and listen to the audiobook because it sounds amazing.
Yes.
Also, if you don't know what the cover looks like, please go Google it now because the cover of this book is just phenomenal. Is there
a special edition of the book? Who's it with?
I think it's sold out. It was with Goldsborough, but they only printed 250 copies, and I think they went quite quickly. My father-in-law didn't get one in time.
Oh no!
He was really annoyed about it.
I was going to say since we know you, but now,
well, that's rude.
It's the father-in-law.
They were 250 numbered, and they gave me number one, which I was very.
Oh, wow! But yes, the cover is beautiful.
Yeah, it is beautiful.
And also, touch the egg because the egg.
The egg on the spine.
The egg on the spine.
Yes.
Just the detail, guys. The detail. I know us book nerds will appreciate that.
Yeah. So please do rate, review, and subscribe to our podcast as it helps to boost us in the charts. Please do go give Bobby a follow. Is it at Bobby Palmer?
This is so pretentious. It's at the Bob Palmer. I chose that handle when I was 14, and I wasn't a the then. I think 30 people followed me, but I'm working at being worthy of it.
Okay, so
they're
definite
gonna know that it's you, so that's amazing. Yeah. So we will also include a link to that in the show notes. Thank you so much, Bobby, once again. This has been amazing.
Thank you for having me.
Bye.